Welcome to Arcade Dojo. In this video, I'll show you how to do a quick, easy, and cheap mod to customize the height of your joystick to the exact specifications tailored to you and your setup. You don't have to mess around with any of these aftermarket extenders that frankly look and feel awkward and can't be easily customized. I haven't seen anybody else doing this mod. I've been doing it for a few years on all of my sticks, as I think getting the shaft height right is perhaps the single most important property of your stick. People often talk about things like the stick's engage and throw distance and tension, but you rarely hear people talk very much about the shaft height, which is funny because the shaft height is actually what has a big effect on how all of these other attributes feel. So anyways, the best thing about this mod is it's universal, it works on just about every joystick setup out there, with maybe some minor differences. And you probably have all the tools and things you need already lying around, and if you don't, it's really cheap. Go to the dollar store and you'll have this stuff in no time. So you need a sort of medium hardness plastic pen, hopefully that matches the diameter of your shaft at some point. A lot of these pens are tapered, so it's good for finding the shaft diameter. I'll get into this in a second. You'll need a good cutting device and sort of a thick tape. I used a duct tape here. You can use electrical tape, hockey tape, anything like that would work. And optionally, also some sandpaper to smooth out some rough edges. And I use a twist tie here to sort of gauge the diameter better. Before we go into the mod itself, it's worth talking about what is an optimum height for the joystick shaft. And for me, I have a method on this because I've noticed that for most movements, regardless of your type of grip, most of the movements are initiated by the pointer finger and thumb. So the best way to find out the optimal shaft height for you is to match up the activation point on the ball or bat top with the middle part of your pointer finger. Wherever is most comfortable and gives you the most effortless activation, which is usually sort of top middle of the ball, that's how high you want the shaft to be. If the shaft is too high, not only does this make a larger than necessary throw and too loose of a feel, but the activation point is too low and not optimal. Similarly, if the shaft is too low, it can also be suboptimal. If you don't know what shaft height is your optimum height to begin with, then a good way of testing this out is to simply unscrew the ball and test out different heights, and then make note of this height for later. In my case, I was coming from the LS32 joystick, which had the absolute perfect height for me. I think it's about 22 millimeters, and it's not a half a millimeter more or less than it needs to be. Just perfect. So I measured that out just by cutting a little piece of cardboard. I found this a little bit better than just taking out a ruler and taking off the bat top, because when I do this in the future, I can just hold onto this piece of cardboard and standardize all my arcade sticks. You may want to consider changing the mounting of the stick via the mounting plate under the housing. Here I installed an LS40 joystick, and if I chose to mount it more or less flush by using an S-shaped mounting plate, then the joystick would be too tall to begin with. My optimal height was 22 millimeters. This would result in something like 24 millimeters, which is too tall. But by using this flat plate and mounting it 5 millimeters lower will result in about 19 millimeter shaft. So I'll have a few millimeters to play with in order to make this mod, and it allows me to test out shorter heights too if that's something I desire. In order to gauge the diameter of the shaft, you can do any of a number of things. Here I'm using a little twist tie and tying it around the diameter fairly tightly. And there you go, it gets me the diameter pretty well, and from there I can draw it out on a piece of paper, cut out a hole, whatever you need to do. Or just mark it off on the piece of the pen that you're going to end up using to do this mod. In my case, my shaft came with a cover, which I wasn't using anyways, as it made it too thick for me. But it was perfect because it allowed me to get the shaft diameter exact and match it up to the pen diameter at the point where it can't go any further. So just mark that point off on the pen, as this is where you're going to start cutting. So now we're going to cut a piece off of this pen, which acts as a spacer now for our joystick. We're going to want to cut off a piece that's the difference between your current shaft height and your desired shaft height. So in my case, the shaft height was roughly 19 millimeters, and my desired height was about 22 millimeters, so I'm going to need about a 3 millimeter spacer. And it's best, of course, to maybe cut a little larger than you need, than too short, because then it'll become useless. When you get that piece cut off, just run it over some sandpaper and smooth it out, and get it to the exact height you need. And here's the result. I didn't try to get too perfect about it, but it'll work. You'll probably find out that you'll want to cut a few of these and test out slightly different variations, because even a small difference in height can have a big difference in the feel. And now we're going to want to cut a thin piece of tape that's no thicker in width than the spacer's width itself, from top to bottom. This ended up a little too thick, but I ended up stretching it out to make it a little thinner. Could have cut another strip, but of course I'm a bit lazy. Then I wrap the tape around the base of the threading, and we're doing this basically to fill in the empty space between the spacer and the threading, so that when you put the spacer on, it fits just right. It's a little wobbly still, you can see, so I add a little bit more tape until it was a little harder to put in, and that made it more or less just right. And finally, screw on the ball top, and you can tighten it fairly well now because the spacer has a little bit of give, being plastic. This is also why you didn't want too soft of a piece of plastic, because it can actually crush if you over tighten it. But in this case, I didn't tighten it actually all that much, as at this point I basically just want to test it out and make sure it's the right height. And now looking as a sort of A-B, checking out my LS32 shaft height versus my mod on my LS40 to match that shaft height. I would say it's pretty exact. With this small mod, believe it or not, I got this LS40 to go from a sort of awkward transition to feeling just right moving on from my LS32. It made a really big difference, so yeah, I recommend going ahead and trying it out with your setup.